Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we'll be breaking this thing down once again, verse by verse, into factual, logical statements in English so that we can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by the contents of his book, and more importantly for us, as non-believers, how does this affect our lives in the world today? So, as I always do before I start, I'm going to tell you now, if you wish to fact check anything I'm about to say, please buy, translate and read one of these, an Arabic only Quran, which is the word of Allah, not an English Quran or Quran.com, because they're not the same. These are actually highly edited, miss lots of stuff out and are wrong false doctrines. So if you wish to fact check me, read this, and then once you've done so, you'll recognise everything I'm about to tell you now is 100% true of what Allah says in his book and what Muslims should actually believe today if they are Islamic, if they're not infidels. So, looking forward to this one. Let's get started. What we're going to do today, or this evening, because we went through some verses this morning, we learnt those. Now, I want to have a discussion with you, dear ladies, gents and Pikachus, about the mistakes which Allah hath made. So, and principally of this, we're going to be talking about why I say Islam is actually not an Abrahamic faith, why it's actually mistaken when it says that. And we know this because earlier in the book of Allah, this one, actually in this one as well, what happens is Allah says he gave the book of wisdom, the Torah, to Moses. He says that. He says he gave the book of wisdom to Moses, and then Moses became evil through his sinful calf sacrifice, and then we didn't like him after that. So Allah says, this is the first thing to remember, Allah says himself, the book of wisdom is the Torah, and the Torah, the book of wisdom, is given to Moses, and Moses is not Abraham. Abraham comes first. Abraham has children, his children have children, and the children's children include Moses. In the time of Moses, it's completely separate time to Abraham. There's a lot of time between Abraham and Moses. They're not alive together at the same time. We know this. And Allah's the one who says this, by the way. This is not me, this is not Gospel Torah or anything else. This is strictly coming out of Allah's Quran of the Muslims. That's what he says. So I find it very interesting, after knowing that he said he gave the book of wisdom, the Torah, to Moses, that in 54 he says, 54 of Al-NIISA, he says, indeed they are envious to what Allah did give others from his bounty. Indeed, we, as in Allah and his angels, we, Allah and his angels, gave Abraham and his sons the book of wisdom, and we gave them a great kingdom. So if Allah's earlier words are to be believed, that he gave Moses the book of wisdom, the Torah, how is he now giving it to Abraham much, much earlier? Because if Abraham had the book of wisdom, if Abraham already had the Torah, Moses wouldn't have been important at all, and actually wouldn't have even been in Egypt, and wouldn't have then needed to have a covenant with God to set up Israel. So, my question to you, O Allah, wise and powerful, Allah, come over here, mate. Allah, stop messing about. Come in now. Just doesn't know how to follow orders, this guy. Allah, as you know, sorry, I'm holding it upside down. As you know, we have a few questions as to where and when the appearance of the Book of Wisdom, the Torah, actually was. Now, earlier on in Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, you say it again. You said you gave it to Moses. But now you're saying you gave it to Abraham. You also told me that Abraham is not Moses. Moses is the grandson of Abraham. So my question to you, Allah, is, did you give it to Moses, or was that a lie? Or did you give it to Abraham? Or was that a lie? Which one of those is true? Because they can't both be true. You cannot have your cake and also eat it. It's a bacon cake. You cannot have it. He doesn't want to answer me because he cannot. So yet more compelling evidence that the book of Allah, the Quran of the Muslims, is actually a load of nonsense. And actually we know from factual historical document, like real factual historical sources, that the book of Moses, that's what they call it, the Torah, the book of wisdom to Allah, did not appear until the time of Moses. So Abraham definitely didn't have it. It was written in Hebrew, a language which wasn't actually around in the time of Abraham. Abraham didn't yet have language to write things down with. They were still using like a funny pictorial way of writing things down. They didn't have a formalized language at that point. It was so early in history. So early in history, they didn't actually have a method to make books or write down scrolls. They didn't have any of that stuff. Although some other cultures in the world did. Canaan, which is where all this happens, where Abraham and also Moses is later born, they didn't have that yet. And the reason was because they were always at war with each other. They didn't have peace. They didn't have a long stretch of time in which to develop these technologies for the advancement of society. This only happens after the Israelites leave Egypt. And that's a historical fact. You can go on Google right now. You can check that out for yourself. So we know Al-NIISA, line 34. Indeed, we gave Abraham and his sons the book of wisdom. Historically, at least, is wrong, because it was Moses that got the book of wisdom. And actually, Allah did say this earlier. So what I want you all to realise, the reason I'm bringing this up now, when we go off to debate our Muslim friends, here's a great question you can ask them. First of all, set the question up. Say, right, who gave us the Quran? Who was the one that dictated Allah's Quran? Muhammad. When was it officially released? 632 AD. Okay, fine. What about the Old Testament? Who wrote the Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke and John and the Apostles. Okay, when was that written? 200 or 300 years after Christ. Okay, fine. And when was the Torah written and who wrote the Torah? And they will say, oh, it was Moses. And it was whatever time it was written. I think it was 1020 BC. But don't quote me on that. So once you've set the scene by saying, right, we know the Quran was Muhammad, 632 AD. We know the Gospels was 200 to 300 AD. The Apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the Gospel writers. And we know that Moses was the guy that wrote the Torah. Get them to agree that first. Once they've agreed that, they've dug themselves a hole. Because then you can say, oh, okay. But actually, in the Quran of the Muslims, in Al-NIISA, book number 4, number 52, verse 52, even though you just said it was Moses, and you only know that from the Quran, and bearing in mind in line 7 of Al-Baqarah, Allah says, his guidance is always true and sure and never in any doubt, and if you follow it, you won't be in sin, so you won't be an infidel. And he also says you have to follow every single verse and word of his Quran, or you're an infidel. You have to follow all of it. How, O Muslim, how can you believe that the Torah was given to Moses by Allah in the time of Moses, unless Al-NIISA line 54 is incorrect? Because it says, and I quote, indeed we gave Abraham and his sons the book of wisdom. Now, what is the book of wisdom? They're going to try and argue and say, oh, the book of wisdom doesn't mean the Torah. And it's like, well, according to this one, the book of wisdom is the Torah. That's expressly described by Allah in speech quotes. Allah physically says that himself. It's not narration. It's not, you can't interpret it any other way, because Allah said these things himself word for word in the Arabic and also in the Satan one, you know, the one he says was written by Satan. They both agree Moses got the book of wisdom given to him by Allah in the time of Moses after leaving Egypt. So if that's true, and you have to believe that or you're an infidel, how can you also believe that we gave Abraham and his sons the book of wisdom? Because if Abraham and his sons already had the book of wisdom, Allah can't have given it to Moses, because it's already in Abraham's hands and his sons also had it. And his sons are the ones who had Abraham. Abraham was the son of Abraham's sons. So, in conclusion of line 54, book 4, Al-NIISA in the Quran, we know, O Muslims, as we have discussed before, you cannot be a good Muslim. You have to be an infidel if you follow Allah's commands. Because Allah is telling you, O Muslims, you have to believe that he gave the book of wisdom, the Torah, to Moses after Egypt, in the book of the time of Moses. But you also have to believe that it was already written and Abraham and also his sons had it and he gave it to Abraham back then. Please explain this to me, O Muslim. Use your Quranic wisdom and morality and the guidance of Allah, which is always true and sure and is never in any doubt. Please use that to explain to me how Abraham and his sons can have the book of wisdom thousands of years before, but also Moses can be given it by Allah. And see where they take that, because that will be... I'm almost rubbing my hands with glee for that conversation. Let's have that debate. Let's have the debate. Who wrote the holy books? When did the holy books appear? Just using the Quran, because it's a source of all wisdom and knowledge according to Allah. Did he forget that he gave it to Abraham and then actually say, oh, I gave it to Moses, which would make that a lie if he just forgot he already did it? Or was he lying about giving it to Abraham and then he did definitely give it to Moses, which makes him a liar? So either way, if you're a Muslim, not an infidel, and you believe both of those, you have to logically believe either he's a liar and he lied about giving it to Abraham, or he forgot. And he did actually give it to Moses, and he's he's either lying about Abraham or he's lying about Moses, and he forgot. It's got to be one of those two things. Otherwise, there's two copies of this same book, in which case, his verse when he says, I gave the Gospels and the Torah to Jesus Christ, Son of Allah, so that they could update their religions, that would be wrong. So it's glorious. Thank God for logic and reason, and Allah being completely easily recognizable and provable as being wrong and nonsense. So this is the first thing to remember when you're debating the Muslims. Bring up the holy books, set it up first. Don't just lead them down the dark path first, then trap them in it. That's what they would do to you. You can do this with truth, though. You don't have to make lies up like they do. So say, who wrote the Quran? When was it around? 632 AD, and it was Muhammad. Who wrote the Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Apostles, and it was 200-300 years AD. Who was the one who brought the Torah, the Book of Wisdom? Moses. Once you've got them to commit that it was Moses, and you could even go a little bit further with this, and you could bait them out with several questions to make sure they're like, no, it's definitely Moses, Try suggesting that it wasn't Moses to them, then they'll go, no, it's definitely Moses, and they'll get angry, and then go, okay, you were right, it was definitely Moses. I bow to your greater knowledge, O Muslim, it was 100% definitely Moses. And they'll go, yeah, see, I told you, I'm so clever, I'm so smart, Allah is the greatest, he made me this wise and clever. Then bring up Al-NIISA line 54 and say, so Allah was lying then when he said he gave it to Abraham and his sons. And they'll go, oh, no, you're interpreting it wrong, you've got the context wrong, or they'll come up with some excuse, and then just sit there and go, all right, explain. Please, I'll give you all the time you need. Please tell me about it. And they'll dig and dig and dig and bury themselves in the hole, and then they'll go, yeah, you're an evil Jew. That's what they always end up doing. So it's worth remembering that as your first question to any Muslims. Who wrote the books? Quran, Gospels, Torah, Book of Wisdom. Then questioning whether it was Moses or Abraham, because Allah has said both. And you can also throw in the bit about how Allah says you have to follow every single line and verse. You can't pick and choose, or you're an infidel. You can't argue or disagree or have doubts with his words, or you're an infidel. And his guidance is always 100% true and never in any doubt, or you're an infidel. That's what he said. So that's the first bit. Allah doesn't know when the Book of Wisdom was written. Was it Abraham? Was it Moses? We just don't know unless we read another book like the Torah or the Gospels or factual history, which then says this isn't the source of all knowledge and wisdom. So you see what he's done here? He's tripped himself over in a tangled web of lies and deceit, which just leads to more and more and more questions which we can answer with factual sources to know the Quran of the Muslims is the biggest load of nonsense ever and doesn't even agree with its own self. So move on. Another thing I thought was interesting is when Allah's talking to the women and he says in 50, look how they create lies against Allah, which itself therein is the most heinous and clear sin. They do not obey Allah. So what he's saying here is people who don't believe in the Quran, every single line, verse, and they doubt it, like I just did, proving that he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's the most heinous and clear sin. It's obviously a sin that we're arguing with Allah because he never gets anything wrong. Ever. Like he just did. And the reason they're wrong is because he's always right and they're not obeying him. So the roundabout thing that he's saying here is, oh women, no, if you make mistakes, or if you're wrong in any way, it's because you weren't obeying Allah that you made that. And that means you're in clear sin. So try to stick only to this book, even when it contradicts itself, and you have to believe two concurrent opposed things. Otherwise, you're an infidel. So he's admitting here, anytime you make a mistake, O Muslim women, or you get anything wrong in your life, it's only because you don't know enough Quran, and that means you're not obeying Allah, so you're creating a big sin. But also you have to believe that Moses and also Abraham in 2 separate periods of time were given the Book of Wisdom. Otherwise you're an infidel. So you're always going to be an infidel through that little web of lies. So that means the preceding line, 49, haven't you seen those who purify themselves? They never can, though. Only Allah purifies whom he will. How is he going to purify you from that? Unless you are brainwashed and you just believe there's 2 multiverse versions of the Book of Wisdom, which cannot be. So we know from this further evidence that Allah is Satan. He is purposefully tricking you, O Muslims, into a sinful life of disbelief in the truth and following a false doctrine, like we just saw there. And he's extending that to his women by saying, if you don't obey these guys who are in error with this, you are also in a clear sin because you're not obeying Allah. And then he goes on in 51, have you not seen the idol worshippers? So we get to this bit about the... I love this bit the most. The idol worshippers. So in Islam, idol worship is anything which is not described in here, which could be considered to be occult. So when you buy your magazine, women, you know, when you're on the train on the way back from work and you're reading whatever magazine you read, and it's got like star signs, or it's got horoscopes, or it's got stories of the boy celebrities which you like to look at, you know, because it cheers you up and it's a time waster effectively before you get home. So it's just something to do. When you're doing that, you are being misled by Allah because you believe in Satan's magic. Now, Satan's magic and pagan rituals, being yoga, being horoscopes, being breathing exercises, being going to the gym and learning about Tai Chi, being going to your toddler mother and toddler group and hanging out with other parents who, you know, you're not allowed to hang out with men or infidels or listen to them. All that stuff is considered pagan rituals and Satan's magic. And they will make an infidel of you. You should say, these ways are better than Allah's ways to guide you. Or no, you shouldn't. That's what they're going to say to you. You should say, no, this is all evil magic. So I will ask you, if those things are evil magic, how is magic described in here as only being the product of Magog and Magog? Or I can't remember what their names is. There's 2 demons he earlier sends into Israel. Majaj and Hajjaj, that's the ones. Majaj and Hajjaj go, he sends them to Israel to mess with them, and he teaches the Israelites magic, and they're the source of magic. Everyone else on earth's not allowed to use magic. And actually, later on, at the end of Al-Baqarah, Taluth is looking through holes in the wall at Israel, and he's going, wow, these guys are using magic because their technology is so advanced compared to his desert insurgents. He thinks it's magic. That's the reason why Allah has to send Hajjaj and Majaj there to create the magic, because otherwise the Muslims will be praying for it and he won't be able to give it to them. So my point is this. If high technology is magic, and being accurate in a book of wisdom like the Torah is magic, then are we saying, Allah, everything that you don't have in here, i.e. the truth and the technology that we have here, if that's magic, are you saying Muslims in the future shouldn't have technology or truth? This is another great debate question for you. So we know about the book thing. That is undeniably going to make Muslims very mad because it's truthfully making them look like their book is nonsense. But this one is a good second one. After you've done that, bring up the magic and the Satan ritual and the Hajjaj and Majaj bit. You'll have to do a little bit of research. I've done previous episodes of it, but it's easier if you just Google it if you just want the debate bit. Ask them that. Say, if Allah has said to you all this high technology and stuff and the reading of truth from the Book of Wisdom is satanic, magical, pagan rituals, that means you can't have it in future. So, why are both Iran and Saudi Arabia, through their Islamic governments, sending rockets to space and trying to develop nuclear bombs? Which would be magic if we apply this. Either the top Islamic authorities on earth, which are the Iran for the Shia and Saudi Arabia for the Sunni, where Mecca is, if they are applying this and they think that that high technology is magic, why are they doing it? Perhaps, like I said in an earlier video, these guys are enslaving you so that you can pay for the food on their table and their lavish lifestyles, but they don't have to follow it. And that would also back up various other earlier videos I've done, and actually debates that I've had, where I've plainly said and proven, in Islamic countries, only the bottom rung of people, the peasants if you like, the peasantry, they're the only ones that have to follow and observe all these ridiculous nonsense rules from Allah's Quran. The guys at the top don't have to, and the way they get away with it, as we know from Al-Imran, is they have to be praised up. We have to cover the sins of our brothers and praise up the religion. Allah loves those guys the most because he's a socialist. And, you know, you have to protect your leaders more than you do yourselves. So, in conclusion of the magic and ritual and the shilling of the Iranians and the Saudi Arabians when they're doing rockets to space, nuclear bombs, which Allah would describe as magic, which you're not allowed to have. How are they allowed to do that? But you're not even allowed to listen to musical instruments. You're not even allowed to listen to a guitar, a violin, a bell. These are things which are judged by Muhammad to be haram for you, O Muslims. You're not allowed to have music. You're not allowed to have art. You're allowed nothing outside of what's in this book. Specifically, this book and nothing else is what you're allowed. But the guys at the top are having boxing tournaments. They're having musicians introduce the crowd before the boxing starts. They're having alcohol. They're having gambling. They're sending rockets to space. They're developing nuclear weapons. And they are friends with Christians and Jews. So that's the summary of this, is in debates with these Muslims, don't do it as gleefully as I have, because they'll call you arrogant and they'll get annoyed. And you have to lead them into it. Don't just up front give them the question, because they'll recoil and they won't answer it. They'll come up with the mystification tactics. You know, Allah's verisimilitude to trick you. No. Lead them down the alley by suggesting that you don't know and that they're going to win. When they spot a possible victory, they'll go, let's go towards that. So you can funnel them down into it. Then when they're in, drop on them with the whole 3 books thing. Who wrote the New Testament? Who wrote the Old Testament? Who wrote the Quran? When and where? And then Abraham or Moses? Who was it? Because Allah said both. Once you've got them with that and they want to change the subject, then mention Hajjaj and Majaj. They'll go towards that because it's something they know. Then bring up how Hajjaj and Majaj were the source of all magic, and magic is high technology and truths, which no Muslims are allowed because it's from demons Allah has sent to Israel. So only the scabby infidels are allowed that. Then mention how Iran and Saudi Arabia are actually using what Allah describes to be magic in here by sending rockets up to space, which they're currently doing, by trying to build nuclear weapons, which they're currently doing, by having a boxing tournament filled with alcohol and gambling, which they just did, and during the boxing tournament having Western music to introduce the crowd, which is haram. And then once you've buried them with that, or rather they've buried themselves, because they'll try and argue it, they'll be using Allah's verisimilitude, you know, his confusing language, to try and get out of the hole they've just dug for themselves, but they won't be able to. When you've done that, then just say to them, if this doesn't prove to you that Allah's guidance is wrong, then you must just be brainwashed, because what you're saying to me with the Moses thing is that you believe 2 completely opposed accounts of a factual thing in history to be true. It's almost like saying you believe that you're a square, but you're also a triangle. That's what you're saying. You believe 2 opposite things. And then with the Hajjaj and Majaj magical bit, with the rockets and the boxing tournament and the nuclear weapons, you're actually saying it's okay for your leaders to do all this haram stuff which Allah hath forbidden, but not for you. And that's where you get to the absolute point we're trying to make here, is that Muslims are slaves of Allah. If they defend those points, it's them defending their own chains of slavery, because why would the higher up guys, the kings and the maliks and the politicians and the imams, why would they be able to do these things and have you, O Muslim, preach them up and cover up their sins as Allah's told you to? Why is it okay for them but not for you? Why do you have to end up paying for it? That's why you've never got any money. But you're not even allowed to listen to musical instruments. There's a host of things you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to drink, gamble. You're not actually allowed to be a boxer. You're not allowed to harm other Muslims. You can't even practice boxing at all in your own country. And when you go abroad, you're only allowed to go for the holy jihad. How is it that you're a Muslim who believes that Allah is graceful, merciful and powerful and truthful and lovely to you when he is forcing you out of those things and punishing you really heavily for doing them, when he's allowing the higher up guys to do it and they don't care about you whatsoever, then lead them via that conversation and debate, which they will absolutely lose, towards the truth. I'm not saying Christ, which is the truth for me. Lead them towards the actual factual truth of those things. Who wrote the Torah? Show them the factual historical sources of who actually wrote the Torah. Then refer them back to the part which says Allah gave the Torah to Moses in Al-Baqarah, and also the part in Al-Nisa where he forgets that and says he gave it to Abraham much earlier. Show them the bit in Al-Nisa which describes magic, then refer back to Al-Imran when and Al-Baqarah, the end of Al-Baqarah, when the Taluth story's going, and Allah directly says to the desert insurgents, this is magic, you are not allowed it, I'm only sending it to Israel via these two demons, Hajjaj and Majjaj, so that they can be brought to sin and we can get them later on and destroy Israel. Because when you have all that arranged and you bring it to the Muslims in debate, as long as you don't do it arrogantly, even though they won't admit to you and they'll shout and call you a Zionist or evil Jew or whatever, you know, they'll just make up some horrible thing about you so they can avoid talking about that. When they go away, you would have put doubt in their minds. And that's the main thing you need to do with these guys, is make them feel doubt over this so that they can come to their own conclusion in their free will that it's wrong. And not have you tell them it's wrong. They need to discover that it's wrong for themselves. That will open the way to them being enlightened by the truth and hopefully realizing that the end times genocidal prophecy, the day of resurrection, is never going to come. Allah's paradise will never be created. Much like all the other prophecies he made, it's just flat wrong. So, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all. Good night, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. And just one more thing, Muslims. Jesus Christ never makes a mistake like that, i.e. giving you two versions of the same event and telling you to believe both. Anyway, just a thought. Pray to Jesus, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Bye-bye.